This conference will now be recorded.
Uh, Good morning, everybody. Today's topic is chronic suppurative otitis media. So, we have finished ASM last class. So, chronic is defined as inflammation of the mucoperiosteal lining of middle ear cleft. So, all of you know middle ear cleft includes eustachian tube, the middle ear proper, epitympanum, adductus ad antrum, and mastoid antrum as well as mastoid air cells. So the minimum duration is it should be more than 3 weeks to say it is a chronic disease, and incidence is higher in developing countries. Why? Because of poor socio-economic status, overcrowding, malnutrition, and lack of health education, that is sanitation and all, and affect both the sexes and in fact involves all age groups. Now it can be divided into broadly two types. Previously, old classification was tubotympanic and atticoantral, but that has been replaced by mucosal disease or squamosal disease. Now, mucosal disease may be active, inactive, or healed, and squamosal disease may be active as well as inactive. So active disease indicates what? There is acute inflammation. So definitely there will be ear discharge. And inactive means there won't be any discharge, but you will have a permanent perforation of the pars tensa. Healed or means where the membrane has healed by itself and there is no chance of discharge because the perforation has been sealed off of its own or even by some surgery also. So a healed otitis media, even a successful surgery also comes under the category of healed otitis media. Then squamosal type, again inactive means you have a retraction. The retraction can involve the posterior superior quadrant of pars tensa or the pars flaccida. So, and but there is no discharge, but there is just a retraction pocket, and it might the retraction pocket. What happens if the keratin debris may collect and get infected in the future? But as of now, there is only retraction, but there is no debris and also no discharge. So you can say it as a inactive squamosal type. Active squamosal is where there is cholesteatoma, and cholesteatoma along with infected secondary infection leading to ear discharge. Now, again, you can divide into two types. I have told you this is the old classification, tubotympanic. So, tubotympanic, let us stick to the mucosal type. This is the atticoantral or the squamosal type. So first is these are the few differences which you should know because these are very commonly not only asked in your theory paper but also in your practical exams. So the discharge in case of a mucosal type is profuse, mucoid, odorless. It can be mucoid, it can also be mucopurulent. So, but it is profuse in amount. Whereas in atticoantral or squamosal type, the discharge is scanty, purulent, and foul smelling. See, here mucoidal component is not there in case of the squamosal type. Now, why? Because of simple reason is that the middle ear mucosa, particularly the mesotympanum, has a lot of mucus secreting glands and plenty goblet cells. So these goblet cells they secrete the mucus part. Whereas in case of squamosal type, which usually involves the pars flaccida, the lining epithelium is a pavement type and which is devoid of goblet cell and mucosal glands. So definitely the secretion will be very scanty and also will be purulent, but never mucopurulent. This is a very, what you say, a silly mistake you the student make, that in aticoenteral they say mucopurulent. No, it is never mucopurulent. Rather, it is only purulent. And these are odorless, but here you will have foul smelling discharge. So this foul smelling discharge may be due to osteitis and granulation tissue, leading to the typical foul smelling discharge is a rotten fish. I think most of you at some point of time might have gone to a fish market, and the smell of rotten fish is exactly the smell of cholesteatoma. Now perforation, it is central always, where this may be a marginal or it may be in the attic. Now central perforation by definition, you write it down. It is very important and it will be asked to everyone. Define central perforation. So the definition goes like that: a breach in the continuity of pars tensa. A breach in the continuity of pars tensa is called central perforation. So there is a breach in the continuity of pars tensa, and that is known as central. So marginal and second half is surrounded by a rim of intact tympanic membrane, or at least the fibrous annulus. So first half of definition is a breach in the continuity of pars tensa. Second half is surrounded by a margin of remnant tympanic membrane, or at least fibrous annulus. Am I clear? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Have you written it down? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Now, marginal perforation by definition is, marginal perforation usually what happens, it involves the posterior superior margin. So, marginal perforation is where one boundary of the perforation is formed by the bony annulus, and the remaining boundary half is formed by the remnant tympanic membrane. So here what happens, bony annulus means the fibrous annulus has been eroded by the disease and the bone has been exposed. So even though the perforation is involving the pars tensa, that is the posterior superior quadrant, marginal perforation comes under the category of squamosal disease. You remember, that means it is not a safe type of CSOM, rather it is a dangerous type of CSOM. Okay, so where one half of the boundary is formed by the bony meatal wall and another half by the remnant tympanic membrane. So granulations are uncommon, whereas it is very common in case of the squamosal type. Polyps are pale in color, and here is red and fleshy polyp. And the moment you touch to while cleaning, it starts to bleed. And cholesteatoma is usually absent here and commonly present. Complications are rare, but they are seen. It's not that they are not seen; they are seen. Whereas here it is quite common. Audiogram, you have both mild to moderate conductive hearing loss. Here also you have conductive hearing loss, or in some cases you may get a mixed type of deafness. So in mucosal disease, there is no evidence of invasion of squamous epithelium. Now, how you can say this? This can be said only when you examine the patient under a operating microscope. That is what you known as one of the what you say examination you do. So normally we use bullseye lamp. Then next step is we use a otoscope. The next step is when you examine under a microscope, operating microscope with magnification, then only you can comment that there is no invasion of squamous epithelium. Whereas here you find there is invasion of squamous epithelium. So how to know means squamous epithelium color is it's glistening like silvery in color. So you can clear cut, you can make out the difference between the normal middle ear mucosa in the mesotympanum, which is pink in color, and rather than the squamous epithelium, which is pearly white in color. So, in case of active disease, there is perforation of pars tensa with inflammation of mucosa and mucopurulent discharge. So, the discharge is profuse because of the amount of secretions which comes from the goblet cells and the mucosal gland. And after cleaning the discharge, then you see the whole mucosa of the pars tensa appears red and velvety in nature. Whereas in case of squamosal disease, clear-cut cholesteatoma is seen either in the posterior superior part of pars tensa or in pars flaccida. And you will find features of bone erosion and also granulation tissue and offensive discharge. In case of inactive disease in mucosal type, you have only a perforation of pars tensa, but the middle mucosa isn't inflamed and there is no discharge. So remember, if an examiner asks you which is the one criteria which says that this is a case of CSOM, tell me one criteria which says that the case you have seen is CSOM. That is, that one criteria is a permanent perforation. No discharge, no hearing loss, but it should have a permanent perforation to label a case as CSOM. So a permanent perforation is the most important criteria. So here in inactive squamosal type, you have retraction, but there is no discharge, and also you don't find any debris. So healed tympanic membrane, it is healed by two layers. As all of you know, the tympanic membrane has three layers, which I had taught you: outer squamosal layer, middle fibrous layer, and inner mucosal layer. So what happens when the tympanic membrane heals by itself without any intervention? The middle fibrous layer doesn't heal. The middle fibrous layer remains deficient. So when it heals by itself in a healed tympanic membrane, you find only two layers. The fibrous layer is deficient. So what happens is, because the fibrous layer gives strength to the tympanic membrane, so the tympanic membrane, healed tympanic membrane, appears to be thinned out and more transparent, and can get easily retracted if negative pressure builds up again in the middle ear. Okay. Now here you can see this is the perforation, and thereby exposing. You can see these are the margin which is regular, and this is the round window niche which is exposed. Okay, and uh, why it is known as safe ear? Because it does not cause any serious harm. This is not mandatory, but in majority of cases, you don't land up with any serious complication. And infection is limited to antero-inferior part of middle ear cleft. So why antero-inferior part is? So that is why it is called as a tubo-tympanic disease. So the disease comes from the eustachian tube. So because the eustachian tube lies is related to the anterior wall of the middle ear, so the antero-inferior part is most commonly involved in tubotympanic disease. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
Ah. So why you say tubotympanic disease is safe? Because there is no risk of bone erosion. But still, you see lot of cases they present with erosion of the a long process of incus. But the incidence or the is quite low. Not known to cause intracranial complications. This is a usual thing unless and until the patient is immunocompromised, like a diabetic or on any steroid therapy. uh, then he or she might land up with an intracranial complications. Or also depends on the pathogenicity of the microorganisms. Discharge from middle ear flows freely through the perforation in pars tensa. So that is what the discharge comes out. So what happens is the mastoid antrum and the middle ear empties itself very regularly. So there is no pent up of any secretions. And usually the perforation of pars tensa is surrounded by a rim of intact drum. I have told you the annulus is intact in all these cases. So I told you in the definition that at least the fibrous annulus is spared. So remember, if the fibrous annulus is not spared, then it doesn't come under central perforation. So coming to the etiology, the inadequately treated ASOM is one of the cause. Because why? Because ASOM usually, I told you last class, around 95% of ASOM they heal by itself, and very few cases they land up with complications. So one of the complication is permanent perforation, thereby landing up with CSM. So that also who gets it, it's variable. But again, same thing, the immunity, then the nutrition, the resistance of the host, the virulence of microorganisms play a very important role, as well as the functioning of the eustachian tube. Ascending infection via the eustachian tube, nasal allergy, GERD, reflux of the, particularly in children who are fed in supine posture, the reflex, the milk or whatever they drink enters via the eustachian tube into the middle ear, and infected traumatic central perforation. So here what happens is whenever there is a perforation following a trauma, no, the usual home remedy is they pour some oil in the ear, hot oil. So what happens once the oil enters the middle ear, no, it gets infected, and the central perforation, which would have healed without any intervention, and now becomes a permanent perforation. So this also can lead. And another thing is OME, otitis media with effusion. So otitis media with effusion, is very common in children, particularly the school-going children. And why? Because why school-going children? You can ask me why not in the neonatal period or first 1 or 2 years of life. Why? Because in first 1 or 2 years of life, first 6 months, so they are breastfed and they have a good immunity. So the moment there is weaning, then the problem starts. And second thing is they are in a secluded environment, protective environment of home. Once they go to school, no, they mix with fellow friends. So and they carry the infection. They carry the infection. So maybe spread by mostly by fomites, that is sharing a pen, a rubber. You don't know. Anything can. So a student sitting beside, maybe having running nose, and then from there they can get it. So that is how the OME starts mostly in the school going early school going part, and results in formation of effusion in the middle ear. And this effusion, what happens is they have a metalloproteinase. These metalloproteinase enzyme, know what they do, they damage the tympanic membrane. Either they cause thinning out of the tympanic membrane, or in some cases may also perforate the drum. So these metalloproteinase, which are present in the mucoid discharge, can lead to CSY. So microbiology, gram-negative bacilli has been commonly isolated, Pseudomonas aeruginosa, E. coli, and D. proteus. Staph aureus also, that is a gram-positive. Anaerobes sometimes are isolated like bacteroids and streptococcus. But you see the organism in ASOM was mostly gram-positive, like we talked about pneumococcus, and then of course Haemophilus influenza is gram negative, but usually most common is Moraxella is gram positive. But here there is a paradigm shift to gram negative bacilli, and particularly Pseudomonas aeruginosa is very notorious. Why? Because this Pseudomonas aeruginosa infection triggers bone resorption. That is, the ossicular chain damage occurs in Pseudomonas aeruginosa, and particularly the um, outer mucopolysaccharide coating of Pseudomonas aeruginosa, they stimulate the interleukins like interleukin TNF alpha, interleukin 1 alpha, interleukin 6, and these interleukins, they what they do, they increase the osteoclastic activity and lead to bone resorption. So that is why Pseudomonas aeruginosa always needs a special name. So these already we have discussed, nothing to go. So ossicular chain intact or mobile, and necrosis of long process of incus. So depending why the long process of incus is necrosed, two things happen. I will tell you. When there occurs inflammation in the middle ear, what happens actually? This inflammation in the middle ear, no, what happens? The inflammatory mediators and like inflammatory cells like neutrophil, lymphocyte, plasma cell, macrophages, they all pour in into the middle ear. In case of acute, it is mostly neutrophil. In case of chronic, it is plasma cell, lymphocytes, macrophages. So once they come, no, what they do, they attract the what you say, the interleukins. The interleukin, I told you, TNF alpha, then TNF interleukin 1 alpha, interleukin 6, interleukin 8. All these are pro-inflammatory mediators. So they in turn they stimulate the vascular endothelial growth factor, which you might have read in your pathology. So what happens is, with so many cytokines coming into the picture, the, the vascularity of the middle ear increases. So there is neovascularization, and there is hyperemia, and also because the new blood vessels are formed very hastily, and thereby what happens, no, now let us put it in this way: you build a house. If you build a house in say a few months time, uh, you imagine the strength of that house, and you build a house within few days. So definitely the house which is built within few days will collapse and have leaky roofs. The same thing happens here. So because the vascular endothelial growth factor is stimulated, no, they start neovascularization. So new vessels are formed rapidly, and they are formed at such a pace that the endothelial lining, which has a seal, which is a good seal, now has a leaky junction. So there occurs exudates from the vascular endothelium. So thereby what happens? This leads to increased amount of discharge also. And in case of otitis media with diffusion, a lot of mucin secretions also develop. So what happens along with this, they also stimulate the osteoclastic activity. So this vascular, with these blood vessels which are formed now, through that the osteoclast comes, and then they start the process of bone resorption. So the necrosis of long process of incus occur because of the delicate uh, structure of the long process and a very precarious blood supply to the long process of incus. So the long process is just like an end artery, like mostly it is avascular necrosis which occurs, and then uh, this is the long process of incus is the most commonly eroded ossicle, followed by the crura of the stapes, followed by body of incus, followed by the manubrium of malleus. So in the decreasing order, it is first is long process of incus, crura of stapes, body of incus, and then manubrium of the malleus. Then now coming to the pathogenesis, actually three things happen. One is you have a discharge, that is correct, but sometimes you may have granulation tissue, sometimes you may have cholesterol granuloma. Now the question comes, sir, where from the cholesterol comes? So the cholesterol granuloma are nothing but it is the giant cells are formed around the cholesterol crystals. So the giant cell comes and forms around the cholesterol crystal, and these cholesterol crystals come through the blood vessel only, and lead to formation of cholesterol granuloma, which has a yellowish like swelling in the middle ear, and these are all histopathological diagnosis. Clinically, it's very difficult to say. Then tympanosclerosis can occur as a sequelae where there is hyalinization and calcification of subepithelial connective tissue. So this what happens ki this tympanosclerosis is basically a reparative process, and it usually involves the middle fibrous layer only. It spares the outer epithelial and inner mucosal layer. And what happens here, there is increased production of type 1, type 2, and type 3 collagen, and over that the calcium phosphate crystal gets deposited, and this calcium phosphate crystal gives you this white chalky like appearance, and it involves only the what you say the um, middle fibrous layer. But sometimes what happens, this can extend to involve the ossicles, joints, tendon, oval window, and round window. So in this condition, what will happen ki this patient will have more hearing loss compared to this group of patients where uh, the uh, the ossicular chain is not involved. Then fibrosis and adhesion again points to the that this is the sequelae of healing. So clinical features, most common is discharge, which is profuse and mucopurulent and not foul smelling, and hearing loss. So two things. Remember, one very common thing you do a mistake is you say about pain. Now, one thing I will tell you, CSOM is a painless disease. So, if there is pain means it indicates there is some complication. So, only when it is complicated, then you have pain. Otherwise, you don't get pain. So, even though the patient tells I am having pain, you don't mention it to the examiner unless and until you you have some supporting clinical finding for it, like say otitis externa, which is written in the last line. So if there is otitis externa, then definitely patient will have pain. Otherwise, there won't be any pain. So the discharge is there. There is hearing loss. Two things are there: discharge and hearing loss. So discharge and hearing loss, and in some cases you may find tinnitus. So tinnitus usually what happens might be seen in if you are dealing with a person who is in his late 40s or early 50s, where the presbycusis is also just setting in. So tinnitus also can occur, but we have seen patients who are very young but also present to us with tinnitus along with hearing loss. So pain is usually due to otitis externa, which we I think talked about. Prasanna told you about otitis externa. It is inflammation of the external ear. So this might be due to a reaction to the discharge, because the discharge, once it comes out, it soils the external ear and leading to secondary infection, or it might be due to a reaction to the ear drop which the patient is prescribed. Now you can see patients are prescribed suppose any gentamicin or ciprofloxacin, and the patient develops a hypersensitivity reaction. So what happens is there is excoriation of the external auditory canal with secondary infection. So patient will may land up with otitis externa. So in this condition, you will have pain in the ear. So perforation of tympanic membrane can occur in pars tensa of Placida. Pars tensa may be central, marginal, subtotal, total. So here subtotal perforation, I will just tell you the definition. So it is, you can say it is a variety of central perforation which involves all the four quadrants and spares the fibrous end. So subtotal perforation is a type of central perforation involving all the four quadrants of pars tensa, sparing the fibrous annulus. So at least the fibrous annulus should be present. But the total perforation means where the perforation does not spare the fibrous annulus. So the fibrous annulus is also eroded. So this is seen particularly in necrotizing otitis media. So we will come to that in subsequent class. The necrotizing otitis media, and it is in this category of perforation that the chance of cholesteatoma is very high. Even though it's a pars tensa perforation, the cholesteatoma will be high in case of a marginal perforation and also in case of a total perforation. Now this is just a, but this small thing, small perforation means involving 25%. But if even though you tell now, most of the examiners they don't accept this. Now how you can say 25%? So what I say is small means involving one quadrant, medium means involving two quadrants, large means 2 to 3 quadrants, subtotal means 4 quadrants, total means also involving the fibrous annulus. Am I clear? Hello?
Yes, sir. Yes, sir.
Huh? So till now anyone is having any doubt? Anyone? No doubt. Achha, fine. So small means you say it is limited to one quadrant, medium means two quadrants, large means involving 2 to 3 quadrants, subtotal involve all the 4 quadrants, pairing the fibrous annulus, total involving all the 4 quadrants, including the fibrous annulus. These are the different pictures. This all now, stages, active stage means there is a discharge at the time of examination. So remember, in your exam, when you are getting a case, if the patient is giving history of ear discharge or patient is admitted because of ear discharge, then definitely your case is in active stage. Then quiescent stage, so in recent past discharge was present but there is no discharge now. So that is quiescent stage. So that is, you can say 1 month to 3 months period. So 1 month, since the last episode of discharge was more than a month back, you can say the patient is in quiescent stage. Inactive, there is no discharge for 3 to 6 months. It's totally a dry year now. So then you say it's an inactive state. So remember, students, whenever you are taking a case of CSOM, if there is no ear discharge, please ask about when was the last episode of ear discharge. Then you will have a fair idea that in which stage your patient is in. In healed stage, the tympanic membrane perforation has healed. Now there is no scope of discharge and permanently controlled middle ear infection. So there is no scope of discharge. But this stage can have a discharge, can go back to this stage. This stage also can go back to this stage. Okay. So suppose while taking bath, so the patient went for a pilgrimage and took a dip in Ganga, then definitely with entry of water, the inactive may become active stage. But healed stage means there is the perforation has healed. Now there is no scope of this going back into active stage. So investigation, examination. First, when the patient comes to you, a proper history is required. That is very much important. Then number two is you do your regular bull xylem examination using a oral speculum. Oral speculum is very important, particularly if the person is in 40s or 50s and male person, they have lot of hair in the ear, so it's very difficult to see. So once you introduce a oral speculum, all the hairs are taken out and you can have a good view of the deep part of the external auditory canal as well as the tympanic membrane. And then next you do a otoscopic examination, and the third step is right in front of you is examination under microscope. So what is the purpose of doing examination under microscope? So that is to search for any granulations, then to see the uh, mucosal lining. If the perforation is large enough, then definitely you can appreciate the mucosal lining. And in some cases also some focal pockets of pus also you can see. Status of ossicular chain, it is not possible in all cases, particularly if the perforation is small, then you can't see at all the ossicular chain. But if it is a subtotal perforation, then definitely you can have a look. Ingrowth of squamous epithelium from edges of perforation, very nicely you can make it out with the help of a operating microscope. Tympanosclerosis and adhesions also you can see under a microscope. Now, when the perforation is small and still you want to know, sometimes you don't know, even though you are not seeing the ossicular chain, does not mean that the ossicular chain is intact. There might be erosion of long process of incus. So how to know? The perforation is small. So here you can do is what is known as a patch test. So what you take is you take a cigarette paper foil and you patch it over the tympanic membrane. So before patching the cigarette foil, you do a audiometry, and then after patching you repeat the audiometry. Now, if there is no ossicular chain involvement, then what happens? There will be a closure of airborne gap. So the airborne gap will close. But if there is ossicular chain involvement either in the form of discontinuity or in the form of fixation, then there won't be any effect on the airborne gap. Even though you patch the perforation, the airborne gap will remain as such. So this is very, very important. A patch test will tell you whether the ossicular chain is functioning or not. Am I clear? Hello?
Yes, sir.
Achha, good. Are you able to hear? No?
Yes, sir. We are
Okay,
able to
fine.
hear.
Okay, good, good. Then audiogram, all of you, those who are posted, might have seen our audiometry room. These are all soundproof room, and here mostly you will get a conductive hearing loss. And then culture and sensitivity. If there is ear discharge, definitely you take the discharge for sampling and send it for culture and sensitivity, and then based on the report, you select proper antibiotic ear drops to be used. Mastoid X-rays, uh, if it is a case where if the patient has a long history of ear discharge, definitely you will have a sclerotic mastoid. But in some cases, if the pneumatization is good, then you will find there is clouding of the mastoid air cells. So clouding of the mastoid air cells indicates that there is mastoiditis. So invariably mastoiditis will be there to some extent because the lining mucosa is in continuity with the middle ear, and then you will see that there is no bony destruction also. While when you are taking a mastoid X-ray, you see the dural plate, you see the sinus plate, and you also see the size of the mastoid cavity. Hmm. All these you take into account. The pneumatization. Now here you see this is a mastoid X-ray. This is the left ear. This black shadow you are seeing in the center. This is the external auditory canal. Okay, and here you see this is the temporomandibular joint, and this is the occipital bone. You see it going all the way back. This is the occipital bone, and this is a very nice mastoid cavity. And you can see the air cells are there, but there is some degree of clouding. Means this ideally if air is there, no, this will give this color, this black color, but you are not getting it, will be grayish in color. So definitely there is clouding of the mastoid air cells. And this plate of bone you are seeing all the way, this is the sinus plate, and this black shadow you are getting here is the sigmoid sinus all the way coming up like this. So this is the sigmoid sinus, and this is the sinus plate, and here you are getting this is the dural plate, or the tegment plate. So here it is called tegment. Above the external auditory canal, it is called tegment tympani. Above the mastoid antrum, it is called tegment antri. And this angle here is where the sinus plate, the dural plate meet is called the sinodural angle or the Chitalis angle. Sinodural angle or Chitalis angle. So see from the X-ray what we knew, we saw the integrity of the tegment plate. See there is no breach. The integrity of the sinus plate, the nematization of the mastoid, the condition of the mastoid air cells, the size of the mastoid cavity. So these parameters we record. Here this mastoid cavity looks very good. It's a normal size mastoid cavity. But in some cases, the mastoid will be contracted, it will be small. So there, when you are subjecting the case to surgery, you have to be very, very careful so that you don't injure the forward-laying sigmoid sinus or the low-laying dura. So a contracted mastoid has features of a low-laying dura. You can see there is a big gap here, but in contracted mastoid, the dural plate will be somewhere here, and this sinus plate will be somewhere here. So you have to be very, very careful. That means the mastoid is very small. So if you go little bit, if you go little bit drill, little bit superior or little posterior, you might injure the sinus plate. You might injure the dura. So this is an audiogram. You can see this is the bone conduction, and this is the air conduction, and this is the airborne gap which I was talking about. So when you are doing a patch test now, without patching, you do like this audiogram first, and then you patch the ear and take. You will find this will come here if there is no ossicular chain involvement. But if there is a ossicular chain involvement, it will remain as such like this, even though you patch it. Am I clear?
Yes, sir.
So
Yes,
here you
sir.
can see. Fine. So here so this is the air conduction threshold of the left ear. See, the air conduction threshold of left ear is almost normal, but the right ear, which is denoted by the red circle, is a gap. So the bone conduction will be here. That means if they have not shown the bone conduction will be almost at 0 decibel, means near normal. So in the left ear, there is no airborne gap. And whereas in the right ear, there is a big airborne gap. Okay. So this you know. Uh, so in case of audiometry, if you have the hearing loss goes beyond 60 decibel, not 60, in fact above 45 to 50 decibel, you suspect ossicular chain involvement. And associated sensorineural hearing loss should arouse the suspicion of toxic deafness. That means the toxins which are released by the bacteria, or even we are using ototoxic ear drops, can be absorbed through the round window, because the oval window is covered by the foot plate nicely, but the round window has only secondary tympanic membrane. So these toxins are absorbed over a period of time, and the patient can develop sensorineural hearing loss. So this is about pure tone audiometry. And then before going to treatment now, I'll tell you about one thing that is called as the serial tuning fork test. So the serial tuning fork test, you take three frequencies, 256, 512 and 1024. Now, suppose, and in this same patient you use all the three frequencies, and you do Rene test with these retuning fork. Now, if the patient has only Rene negative for 256 and positive for 512 and 1024, then the conductive hearing loss is minimum, say around 15 to 20 decibel. But if the patient has negative Rene to 256 and 512, but is positive to 1024, then the loss is around 30 to 40 decibel loss. But if the patient is negative, Rene is negative to all the three frequencies of tuning fork, then definitely the loss is more than 45 decibels. So even though you don't have a audiometry, by doing serial tuning for chest also, you can have a rough estimate of the hearing loss. Now, treatment is to control the infection if it is in active stage, to eliminate the ear discharge, and to correct hearing loss. Our main purpose is to, so how to control the infection? You take a swab for culture and sensitivity, and then you treat how to do a proper oral toilet. So whatever discharge is there, before instilling the drop, no, the discharge should be clear. Then only the drop will enter into the middle ear. So it is this methodology should be instructed to the patient that before instilling the drop, he or she has to do a oral toilet, clean the ear, then instill the drop. So oral toileting in active disease definitely has a very vital role. Suction clearance under microscope, that can only be done when the patient is admitted. Syringing of affected ear using warm saline mixed with 1.5% acetic acid. I don't know how, we have never done this. I don't know. Nandini is there. Nandini?
Hello, sir.
We have never done syringing of a perforated ear
Um,
because
yes, sir.
warm saline will, if the temperature is more than 44 degrees, will can
Yes, sir.
elicit a caloric response. So
But
better
it
not.
is given in many books, sir. That's why
5%. Tell me that.
but it is given in many books, sir. That's why I kept it.
Okay. No, that is why you mix with acetic acid is this acetic acid. No, it has a keratolytic property. So whatever debris are there, no, they will come out. So they can
Yeah.
come out with the help of acetic acid. But when you are using a warm saline, you make sure this is sterile, and the temperature is below 44 degrees. Topical antibiotics administered after culture reports. Good. Eardrops you have. See, these will be asked to you in your exam. Neomycin, polymyxin, chloromycetin, gentamicin. Then you have whole fluoroquinolones group. Ciprofloxacin, ofloxacin, now levofloxacin. All these have come eardrops. So whole fluoroquinolone group, and the advantage of fluoroquinolone is they are not ototoxic and has a good activity against Pseudomonas aeruginosa. So and are very cheap compared to other anti-pseudomonal medications. Steroids. So steroids are used only to reduce the inflammation of the middle ear, and also to reduce the amount of discharge. So I think we are almost finishing here. So, role of systemic drugs, antibiotics. Although we prescribe, I know we prescribe, but it has a very limited role unless and until the patient has some complications. Then definitely antibiotics should be given. Antihistaminics obviously has a role to play, and if you can use systemic decongestants like phenylephrine, also helps to decongest the eustachian tube and helps in aeration of the middle ear. Ototoxic drugs to be avoided. So these are ototoxic: gentamicin, neomycin, chloromycetin causes gray baby syndrome, and polymyxin. This polymyxin is not ototoxic, but particularly gentamicin and neomycin, they are ototoxic. Nasal decongestants are used. That is what I told you. If there is associated rhinitis, sinusitis, so that can relieve the congestion of the nasal mucosa, and also it will relieve the congestion in the and edema in the nasopharynx. So precaution, ear must be kept dry. Pre-existing sinus infection to be treated aggressively. Very, very important. Always remember that whenever you are doing a case of CSOM, you should have a holistic approach. Like you should not be focused go into the ear totally. You should see the nose, paranasal sinus, the nasopharynx also. So presence of focal sepsis in throat also should be managed. These all contribute to the chronicity of the disease. So always keep an open mind and don't think that the problem lies only in the ear itself, but it may be in the nose or sinuses or even in the nasopharynx. So next class we will be talking about the surgical management. Any doubt? Any doubt?
Hello.
Dr. Manas,
Hello.
welcome.
Excellent class.
Thank you.
Uh, okay.
This he was working with us, very dynamic person, ENT surgeon. Now he is working in NRI, Visakhapatnam. So whenever you get a chance, all of you go and meet him, and he gain some knowledge from him also. Most of you know Dr. Manas over here. Uh, Students, any doubt?